Welcome to Graywood Gardening. Part of the plan for the veggie garden this year is to build some in-ground beds along the fences. And because our soil here is literally nothing but sand all the way down, I need to dig this out at least 1 or 2 feet deep and then backfill that with some topsoil and compost. Now, most of these beds are going to hold perennials that I'm not going to be putting in until next year. So this is asparagus and berries, and the idea was I have all summer to dig these out and to get the beds prepped, in the case of the berries, get the pH adjusted. However, this has taken on a new urgency due to the price of lumber. So we were going to build about 6 new raised beds this year, but lumber is so insanely expensive. Literally every raised bed costs us more than twice in lumber costs what it cost us last year. And the lumber is much worse quality too. It is a challenge to find a straight board anywhere. So we decided we're only going to do 2 new raised beds this year, as a result of which I'm actually going to have to use these in-ground beds this year to grow some of our crops, particularly our peppers. We'll probably be planting a bunch of peppers over in the bed that will house asparagus next year. So for the rest of May, I'm going to be doing a lot of digging, and honestly for the rest of the summer, I'll probably be doing a lot of digging. Alright, well on this video, rather than just watch me dig for 20 minutes, we're instead going to go over to the cottage garden where we've got some stuff planted too close together that needs to be transplanted. Also, I'm going to plant out the lower terrace garden, which we're going to direct seed with some perennial flowers. But before we do that, let's head down to the seed starting layer and take a look at how our pepper pot experiment is going. Is there a pot that's proving to be better than another pot? Find out. Well, I'll keep digging. Welcome to the seed starting layer. So let's take a look at how our bell pepper pot test is going. As you can see, peppers are all growing strong. All of these pots are growing healthy peppers. I have noticed a couple of things worth mentioning, first of which is on some of the paper pots, we're actually starting to see roots growing through the bottom of the paper, which is encouraging. That's exactly what we want to see, but I'm actually seeing the exact same thing, in some cases in much more roots coming out of some of the peat pots, which has not been my experience with peat pots in the past. So this is fantastic. One other thing I have noticed is both the paper pots and peat pots are occasionally getting some kind of little mushrooms growing out of them. And peppers really like it pretty dry, so I water these guys probably only once every 4, sometimes 5 days. I'm often not watering them until they start to droop. So this is definitely not getting excessive water. It seems to be something specific about the peat pots and the paper pots where the peat and the paper hold that moisture, which lets the fungus grow, but it doesn't seem to be hurting the plants in any way. So far it does not bother me. The toilet paper tubes, surprisingly, are holding together. In the very first week, in fact the first day when I started watering them, when the toilet paper tube got wet, some of them just broke apart, just split apart at the seams. And the ones that remain appear to be continuing to hold together. And on top of that, we also have roots growing out of the bottom of the toilet paper tube, which is kind of exciting. Now, one thing that is worth pointing out is there definitely seems to be a correlation between the size of the pot, specifically the diameter of the pot, and how big the plants are right now. For example, here in this 6-pack, which is like 2-inch diameter pot, we compare that to even one of the smaller 3.5-inch pot plants. We're getting a much bigger plant in this 3.5-inch pot than we are out of this little 2-inch. And in fact, even the paper pot plants are distinctly smaller than the ones that are growing in these big 3.5-inch. And without question, the toilet paper tube is making the smallest plant of all. So I don't know if any of this is really going to matter at the end of the day when things get planted outside. And then they have a chance to start growing and take off. So it'll be very interesting to see where we end up with this experiment. But certainly at this stage, there appears to be an argument to be made in favor of the larger 3.5-inch, 4-inch pots. But again, it's very possible that these ones that are smaller aren't that much smaller. It's entirely possible that once we plant them outside, they'll catch up and everything will be indistinguishable from each other. All right, that's all I have now. We will check in on these guys again, I think, when it comes time to plant them out, which is not going to be very long now. We're going to wait until the end of May, because I like to be very, very safe and let the weather be very warm before I plant out really, really tender guys like peppers, tomatoes, and basil. This little area of the cottage garden is a little bit problematic. Basically, we planted the plants too close together. So I think what I'm going to do today is I am going to move the New England aster out of this garden. I'm going to put them in the lower terrace garden that already has a few New England aster, and I don't mind the big, tall, shaggy plants there. And that'll give lots of room for just the bachelor buttons, dianthus, and lavender. Then I'm going to dig up at least a couple of these dianthus that are really crowding in the lavender, and I'm going to move them over here to a hole that is where I'm sitting. And spring is a good time to be moving these guys, especially stuff like the New England aster that's not going to bloom till fall. It should not rob us of any blossoms. All right, here in the lower terrace garden where all the little dwarf daffodils are just finishing, I've already got patches of New England aster here, here, and there. So with these 4 new plants, I think I'm going to do a plant in between each of these patches so I can have a nice arc of asters blooming in the fall. As always, we want to water it in really well. In this case, this garden bed is really, really dry. We haven't actually had rain in quite a while. And I noticed when I dug the hole, even the bottom of the hole was pretty dry. And so now I'm kind of wishing that I had actually watered the hole before I planted the plant into it. All right, the dianthus next. I think I'm actually only going to move this one here and this one here that are really crowded them. I don't actually mind these guys staying here. All right, as a final step, I left some big holes here, so I'm going to get some topsoil and fill these holes in. And not only am I going to fill these holes in with topsoil, but I'm actually going to water these holes in too. And the reason is when I dug out these asters and the dianthus, I was digging right alongside the roots of other plants, particularly this lavender and other dianthus. And so I did leave some exposed roots of these other plants. So I'm going to get this covered with soil, and then I'm going to water those in just like I would water in a plant that I was transplanting. All right, this area is taken care of. We can now let this stuff grow and expand this year. Next up, I think, is seeding the lower terrace garden. The plan for the lower terrace garden this year is to actually fill the area with rudbeckia up in front and echinacea all in the back. And we got some lovely mixes of rudbeckia and echinacea that have these autumn-like colors to them. What we're going to do differently this year is we're going to try direct seeding the rudbeckia and echinacea, which is something I've never done before. One thing I am going to do first, though, is because it's been so dry recently, the soil here, which I've got nicely cleared of weeds, but the soil is almost a dust-like consistency. And if a gust of wind comes up, it could actually blow some of this away and blow the seeds underneath away with it. So the first thing I'm going to do is get the hose out and just lightly damp down the surface. I brought a bunch of tongue depressors with me, and the idea is I'm going to shove a tongue depressor in the ground, then I'll plant a few seeds right in front of it. That way, in the weeks ahead, I will know what is a plant that I planted coming up and what's a weed. So it'll be very easy for me to keep this place weeded. The tongue depressors will also make it easy while I'm planting the seeds, so I can take a look and see where everything is and get a sense of what my spacing is. All right, let's get started. Oh no! The rudbeckia seeds are so tiny! They come in their own little packet inside the packet. Oh no. Oh, echinacea seeds. Quite a bit bigger. That's going to make life easier. All right, that is everything seeded. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring out a sprinkler and run the sprinkler for a good half hour so that not just the surface gets wet, but actually soaks down a couple of inches. Now, because this is rudbeckia and echinacea, there is a good chance, at least with the rudbeckia, that it should bloom this year, although both of them will be much larger and have much better blooms next year. So I cannot wait to see how this works out. I'm excited to have like a big sea of rudbeckia and echinacea in these fall colors in the lower terrace garden that will then be pretty free of work for years to come, just a little bit of weeding. All right, there's more work to do. I've got to get these 2 new raised beds built this weekend because next weekend I'm supposed to be planting cauliflower into one of these beds. And I would really like to get everything filled and get the blood meal in it and let it sit for at least a week before I'm planting into it. Not to mention, the odds of my having much time during the week to work on this are pretty poor.
The clouds and let them be. Keep every story of your days a mystery. Hear the songs in the breeze. Sing out your wins and trials like a melody. Ride the storms with your head held high. We only breathe till die. Bring on Light a flame inside your heart. See every finish line before you reach the start. Raise your fist to the sky. Lightning and mountaintops are made for you and I. Morning comes when the nightfall goes. Don't turn back to the road below. Bring on the fire, bring on the rain. Nothing can take you down. Crashing like thunder, steel in your veins. Nothing can take you down.
And done. I always forget how long it takes to build and assemble these things. And it did not help that for this one in particular, the wood was really warped, making the whole bed a little bit twisted even after putting it together. But the plants aren't going to know the difference, so it's going to get the job done. Now, for filling these, you really only need about 1 foot of soil at most for growing annual vegetables. So I like to fill the very bottom with some sort of cheap or preferably free filler. So in this case, I use some wood chips and sand because I have been digging up a lot of sand lately. But then for the actual growing medium, I have a mixture here that's basically 2 parts pulverized topsoil and 1 part compost. And then I mixed in about 3 cubic feet of vermiculite in each bed just to lighten it up a little bit. Now I had actually tested both the topsoil and the compost. So I know the topsoil was generally pretty nutrient poor, which you'd expect, and the compost was really heavy in phosphorus and potassium, which it seems like all compost is. I can't find any compost that isn't off the charts with phosphorus. But neither of them really had any nitrogen, so I also worked in some blood meal. I got that raked in, and now I'm probably going to water it down just to let that blood meal settle in and make sure it's not going to blow away because it's been really dry lately. And then I actually need to plant into at least one of these beds in 1 week from now. I have cauliflower hardening off that'll fill a bed, and I also have a little bit of parsley that'll probably go in another bed. So I got these put together just in time. But now I got to go back to digging holes in the sand. Okay, so with those 2 new raised beds built, that is everything that I have for you on this video. I obviously still have quite a bit more digging to do, but next time I think we might actually do a quick garden tour of how all the gardens at Gray would look at the end of May before our big planting weekend over Memorial Day, which is when we tend to put in all of the flowers and the tender vegetables like the tomatoes and peppers and basil and stuff. All right, well until then, happy gardening.